In today's video, we uncover the most terrifying bear encounters ever recorded. From a python crushing its victim in Indonesia to a black mamba's lightning-fast kill in South Africa. Pressed by momentum through the cottonwoods, a lone scout stepped between a mother grizzly and her cubs and got a screaming answer. The air along the Grand River in August of 1823 was thick and wet, clinging to the skin like a second layer. Sunlight, fractured by the dense canopy of cottonwoods, threw a chaotic pattern of light and shadow on the forest floor, a disorienting landscape for any but the most seasoned eyes. Hugh Glass, a man whose confidence had been hammered into shape by years of surviving in such places, moved ahead of his trapping party. He was their scout, their pathfinder, and his focus was a singular, forward-driving force, a trait that had kept his party safe, but one that bred a perilous disregard for the immediate, unseen world around him. Hugh was not reckless, but he had come to believe he could read the wilderness like a book, forgetting that some of its deadliest passages are written in an ink invisible until it is too late. The other protagonist in this encounter, a mature female grizzly, weighed over 400 pounds. She was not a malevolent force, but a biological machine, programmed with the singular, non-negotiable imperative to protect her offspring. Her tools were not precise, but were designed for overwhelming power. 4-inch claws that could shred through soil and flesh with equal ease, and a jaw that could generate over 1,000 pounds per square inch of pressure, enough to shatter bone. The first and only warning of her presence was not a sound, but a fleeting image. 2 small cubs tumbling over one another in a small clearing just beyond a thicket of wild plums. It was the most urgent danger signal the wild could offer, but Hugh's momentum carried him forward. By the time the image registered, his boots were already committed to the next step, a step that placed him squarely in the narrow, sacred space between a mother and her young. His decision was not a choice, but an act of momentum. Hugh pushed through the last of the plum bushes, his rifle held loosely at his side. From the bear's perspective, the world was a matrix of familiar smells and sounds, and into this matrix came the alien scent of man. It was an upright anomaly, a sudden and direct threat to her cubs. Her response was not born of anger, but of pure neurological instinct. No warning charge, no territorial display, only the instantaneous command to neutralize. The world tore open in a guttural roar. A brown blur erupted from the foliage, a mass of muscle and fur that covered the ground in a single bound. The impact was a physical blow, slamming the air from Hugh's lungs and throwing him backward. His head hit the ground, hard. Then the weight was on him, immense and suffocating. There was no struggle, only a sequence of brutal, mechanical actions. Claws raked his back, the thick hide and muscle parting as if they were muslin. He felt a searing, grinding pressure as her jaws closed on his scalp, teeth scraping against the bone of his skull. She bit into his side, and he heard his ribs crack, a sound like dry branches snapping. Then her teeth found his leg. A wet, definitive pop echoed in the sudden quiet of the forest. The tibias had given way. She shook him once, a violent ragdoll motion, and then the world went black. The bear stood over his motionless form for a moment, her breath coming in hot, ragged bursts, before she turned and vanished into the trees with her cubs. When his companions found him, he was lying in a rapidly spreading pool of his own blood, his body a ruin of flesh and broken bone. They shot the bear, a pointless act of retribution. Captain Henry looked down at the mangled form of his best scout. "He's a dead man," he said, his voice flat. They carried him for 2 days on a makeshift litter, but the progress was agonizingly slow. The whispers started among the men. They were in hostile territory, wasting time. Finally, Henry offered a bonus for 2 men to stay behind and see to a Christian burial. A young Jim Bridger and the cynical John Fitzgerald volunteered. For several days they waited. Hugh did not die. He drifted in and out of a feverish consciousness, his breath a shallow rattle. "He's not giving up," Bridger muttered one evening, watching the shallow rise and fall of Hugh's chest. Fitzgerald spat into the fire. "It ain't our place to wait for him. We've got our own skins to think about." The next morning, they were gone. They took his rifle. They took his knife. They left him to the earth, confident that it would soon claim him. But it did not. He awoke to a silence more profound than any he had ever known. A world stripped bare of everything but pain and the 200 miles of brutal, unforgiving wilderness that lay between him and the nearest outpost of humanity. Choosing a picture-perfect campsite on an exposed gravel bar, 2 kayakers trusted their gear more than their instincts and met a brown bear ripped open their tent at midnight. On Friday, June 11th, 2021, the subarctic summer sun hung low over the Kenai Peninsula, casting an extended twilight across the glacial-fed waters of Skylac Lake. The air was cool and carried the scent of damp earth and cottonwood. Jennifer and Jake, a couple experienced in the Alaskan backcountry, completed a 6-mile kayak journey to a remote gravel campground where Hidden Creek emptied into the lake. Their confidence was reflected in their equipment: bear spray, an air horn, and a comprehensive first aid kit. This reliance on preparation, however, fostered a critical misjudgment: the belief that technology could mitigate the inherent unpredictability of the wilderness they had willingly entered. They were not alone in that landscape. Moving with a silence that defied its immense size was an adult Alaskan brown bear, a creature of pure function and lethal design. A male of its species can weigh over 1,000 pounds, a walking engine of muscle and bone. Its world is defined by smell, a sense 7 times more powerful than a bloodhound's, capable of parsing every molecule of scent on the wind. Its weapons are brutally simple: 4-inch claws made for rending earth and flesh, and a jaw that delivers 1,200 pounds per square inch of pressure, a force not for biting, but for crushing. Earlier, as they unloaded their gear, Jake had noticed a large, indistinct paw print in the damp gravel near the water. It was a momentary curiosity, quickly dismissed as an old track, a fading signature from an animal that had long since moved on. Their critical decision was where to pitch their tent. Guided by the aesthetics of a perfect campsite, they chose the open gravel bar, a flat, exposed spit of land at the mouth of the creek. It was a beautiful spot, but it was also a natural choke point, a corridor for every creature moving between the forest and the lake. Their gear, stowed neatly inside the tent, gave them an illusion of security, a thin nylon shield against a world that operated on a scale they failed to comprehend. As darkness finally fell, the bear, drawn by the alien sense of human activity, approached the camp. The tent was a strange object, a curiosity that pulsed with the faint sounds and smells of life. The attack began precisely at midnight, not with a roar, but with the sound of thick canvas being ripped apart. In that instant, the tent wall ceased to exist, replaced by a wall of dark fur and a suffocating, foul stench. Seconds later, a hot breath washed over Jake before a jaw engulfed his right arm. He felt the sickening, wet crunch as teeth punctured flesh and ground against the humerus. Immediately after, he was ripped from his sleeping bag, the force dislocating his shoulder. Next, a paw scythed through the darkness, its claws, plowing 4 deep trenches through the skin and muscle of Jennifer's side, flaying the tissue from her ribcage. Then, the creature turned back to Jake. Its jaws closed on his thigh. He heard the femur crack under the immense pressure, the bone splintering as muscle was shredded into pulp. The attack was a cacophony of tearing flesh and splintering bone, a mechanical disassembly of human bodies that lasted less than a minute. Finally, the bear withdrew, melting back into the darkness from which it came. Silence crashed back into the space the violence had occupied, thick and heavy with the coppery smell of blood. In the pale twilight, they saw the ruin of their bodies. Jake's leg was a mangled wreck of tissue and exposed bone. Jennifer struggled to breathe, the air hissing through the wounds in her side. The air horn and bear spray lay untouched, useless relics of a plan that never had a chance. Functioning on pure adrenaline, Jake dragged himself to the medical kit and retrieved a packet of QuickClot. With trembling hands, he shoved the gauze into a gaping, bubbling wound channel in his own leg, a horrific act of self-preservation amidst the carnage. They crawled from the tattered remains of their tent, leaving a thick trail of blood on the gravel, and somehow launched their kayaks into the black, frigid water. 2 hours later, their faint cries carried across the lake. An official investigation would later find no provocation. Medical reports would clinically document the catastrophic soft tissue damage, the comminuted fractures, and the deep puncture wounds consistent with a predatory attack by a large ursid. The event at Hidden Creek stands as a clinical record of an unprovoked predatory attack. It underscores a stark reality of the wilderness, that while human preparation may be a factor in survival, it is utterly irrelevant in the prevention of an attack. The ultimate decision to engage is made solely by the apex predator, and it is a decision made in an instant, without warning, and with catastrophic consequences. Running without bear spray, a jogger rounded a blind corner onto a bear cub. On Sunday, May 18th, 2014, the air on Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson near Anchorage, Alaska, was cool and damp with the lingering chill of a late spring. The dense stands of spruce and birch flanking the trail system were slick with moisture, muffling sound, and creating a false sense of solitude. It was here that military couple Jacob and Jessica Gamboa went for a run. A sense of security pervaded the managed trails of the base, a misplaced belief that the infrastructure of military life extended to the wilderness it contained. This confidence was their critical misjudgment. Official warnings to carry bear spray were posted, but they carried none. The creature that would intercept them was a mature sow, brown bear, a female weighing over 600 pounds and standing nearly 8 feet tall on her hind legs. Her biology was dictated by a single overriding imperative, the protection of her cub. This maternal instinct transforms an already formidable animal into an engine of pure defensive aggression. Her power is not in finesse but in overwhelming force, a charge that can reach 35 miles per hour and a bite capable of crushing a moose's spine. The foreshadowing of the attack was not a subtle sign in the wilderness, but a clear bureaucratic directive issued by base command and displayed on trailheads, a warning of known bear activity that was acknowledged and then ignored. Jacob, the stronger runner, soon pulled ahead, leaving Jessica to navigate the winding, forested trail alone. The critical action was a simple, mundane one. She rounded a blind corner at a steady pace. The motion placed her abruptly and without warning into the immediate proximity of a brown bear cub. From the sow's perspective, hidden just off the trail, the sudden appearance of an upright figure was an instantaneous and unacceptable threat. Her neurological response was absolute, bypassing any need for assessment. It was a pre-programmed, violent trigger to eliminate the danger to her offspring. The attack was a silent explosion of mass and speed. Before Jessica could process the sight of the cub, the sow erupted from the trees. There was no roar, only the sound of pounding earth. In that instant, she tried to make herself small, to signal submission. The gesture was irrelevant. A moment later, the bear's weight slammed into her, driving her face first into the dirt and gravel. Then, the teeth came. A jaw engulfed the back of her neck, the canine sinking deep into the muscle and tissue surrounding her spine. She felt a sickening, grinding pop as her vertebrae fractured. She was lifted from the ground, shaken once with a force designed to sever the spinal cord, and then thrown back down. She committed to the simulation of death, her body going limp. The sow, still perceiving a threat, bit down on her arms and legs, its teeth punching through flesh and sinew. It stood over her, hot breath washing over her broken neck, before the perceived threat was finally neutralized. After a final parting bite, the creature disappeared back into the forest. Silence crashed back in. For several minutes, Jessica remained motionless, the coppery taste of blood filling her mouth. The forest was still, the only sound her own ragged, shallow breathing. Pushing through a wave of shock and searing pain, she dragged herself to her feet. Her arms and legs were shredded, deep channels of tissue carved out by the bear's teeth. A river of blood streamed from the wound on her neck. For nearly 2 miles, she stumbled and crawled along the trail, a horrific spectacle of survival. It was there that Sergeant Colin Gillicanin, a base medic out fishing, found her. The subsequent medical evaluation at the Alaska Native Medical Center was grim. In addition to the catastrophic soft tissue damage, the X-rays confirmed a fracture of her cervical spine. The official investigation by wildlife officials pieced together the sequence. The attack was deemed a classic defensive assault by a sow protecting her cub. Sergeant Gillicanin was credited with saving Jessica's life. The incident is a brutal, clinical illustration of a fundamental truth. The perceived safety of a man-made environment is an illusion. In the territory of an apex predator, the rules are absolute and non-negotiable, and the consequences for a single moment of complacency are devastating and permanent. Confident in their skills, 2 hunters failed to consider a grizzly's anger near them. On Tuesday, September 22, 2015, the air on the north shore of Alaska's Skilak Lake was thick with the damp, earthy scent of autumn. Near Dorian Bay, the dense foliage was beginning to turn, the low sun casting long, deep shadows that distorted the landscape. It was in this environment that 2 brothers, Gregory and Roger Matthews, were moose hunting. Their strategy relied on a powerful moose call, an act of supreme hunter's confidence. This was their critical misjudgment. In a landscape saturated with apex predators, they failed to consider what else their manufactured sound might attract. The creature that answered the call was a mature sow grizzly, a matriarch driven by the biological imperative to secure food for her two large cubs. An animal of her size is an engine of pure power, with a sense of smell that can detect a carcass from miles away, and hearing acutely tuned to the sounds of potential prey. Her primary weapons are her immense strength and a jaw that can generate over 1,000 pounds per square inch of pressure, a force capable of crushing the spine of a bull moose. The foreshadowing of the event was not a visual sign, but an auditory one, the loud guttural sound of the moose call echoing through the dense brush, an unnatural projection that served as an auditory beacon not just for moose, but for any predator within its extensive range. The critical decision was made by Roger. He raised the call to his lips and sent a deep, resonant bellow into the wilderness, a sound designed to mimic a bull moose. Gregory stood ready with his rifle, his focus directed towards the area where he expected the moose to appear. From the sow's perspective, the sound was an unmissable signal. It was not a hunter's lure, but the distinct bioacoustic signature of a large ungulate, a massive source of protein essential for her and her cubs' survival. The sound triggered not a defensive instinct, but a predatory one. She began to move towards the source. The attack was an explosion of motion from the underbrush. A massive brown form crashed through the foliage, moving with a speed that seemed impossible for its size. Gregory had just enough time to raise his rifle and fire a single shot. The bullet tore into the bear's jaw, a horrific but non-lethal wound that only enraged it. In that instant, he tried to chamber another round, but she was on him. A moment later, he shoved the barrel of his rifle into her open mouth, a desperate, futile act. Then, the bear's weight slammed into him, driving him to the ground. Her jaws closed on his head, the teeth scraping against his skull with a sound he could feel in his bones. She bit down again, this time on his back, the force of the bite lifting him from the ground before slamming him back down. The sound of the struggle reached Roger, who rushed to his brother's aid. He raised his .300 Winchester Magnum and fired 2 shots into the bear's flank. The heavy caliber rounds finally registered and the sow disengaged, crashing back into the brush. It ran for approximately 100 yards before it collapsed and died. The sudden silence was absolute, broken only by Gregory's ragged breathing. They were alone, miles from help, with no way to make a call. Minutes later, by sheer chance, a boat of fishermen appeared on the lake. They motored to the middle of the lake, found a cell signal, and called 911. A LifeMed helicopter was dispatched, and Gregory was airlifted to a hospital, where his condition was later listed as good. An official investigation later determined the attack to be defensive, a response to the perceived threat from the hunters. The 2 cubs, old enough to survive on their own, were left to fend for themselves. The incident serves as a stark, clinical reminder of the unforgiving logic of the wild. It demonstrates how the tools of a hunter can inadvertently trigger a predatory response, and how a sound intended to attract prey can, with equal efficiency, summon a far more dangerous creature from the shadows. Relying on a flimsy alarm fence and a single vintage rifle, an Arctic expedition ended any bear's rage. In early August of 2011, the air at Von Postbreen Glacier on the Norwegian island of Svalbard was thin and brutally cold. Under a sky that never fully darkened, a British School Exploring Society expedition made camp. Their defense against the apex predator of this landscape consisted of an electric alarm fence, and a single vintage Mauser 98K rifle. The chaperones, concerned about participant exhaustion, made a critical decision. They would not post a continuous bear watch. This act, a deviation from standard Arctic protocol, represented a profound misjudgment, a faith in fallible technology over the unwavering vigilance of a human guard. The creature that would test this faith was a 24-year-old male polar bear. A healthy male of its species is a hypercarnivore of unmatched power, with a bite force exceeding 1,200 pounds per square inch and paws that can kill a seal with a single blow. This bear, however, was not healthy. It was a geriatric animal, severely underweight at only 550 pounds, its body racked with pain from broken and infected teeth that made its normal diet of seals impossible. It was not a predator hunting from a position of strength, but a starving creature operating on the ragged edge of survival. The foreshadowing of the encounter was direct and unambiguous. A fresh bear track was discovered near the camp. This clear evidence of a predator's proximity was noted, discussed, and ultimately dismissed by the chaperones, who assured the young explorers that their technological precautions were sufficient. The critical inaction was the decision to sleep unguarded. The logic, meant to preserve the energy of the participants, created a fatal vulnerability. To the approaching bear, the world was a landscape of pain and gnawing, relentless hunger. Its highly evolved sense of smell, normally attuned to the scent of seals on the ice, detected a new concentrated source of biological odor. The camp was not a threat to be avoided. It was a potential source of sustenance, an anomaly to be investigated by an animal with no other options. The attack began in the disorienting twilight of the Arctic night. There was no warning sound, only the percussive rip of reinforced nylon as the bear's paw tore through the wall of a tent containing 3 young explorers. Patrick Flenders, instinctively pulling his sleeping bag over his head, heard a chaos of screams. A moment later, he saw the white form of the bear dragging a chaperone from another tent. Then it returned. In that instant, the bear's head filled the shredded opening of his tent. Seconds later, its jaws closed around his arm. He heard a wet, grinding crunch as the bones in his elbow were crushed into fragments. Immediately after, the bear bit his face, its teeth puncturing his skull with a sickening, percussive force. The bear then released him and turned its attention to Scott Bennell Smith, who was scrambling to escape the tent. The scene descended into chaos. As the bear pursued Scott, a chaperone, Michael Reed, aimed the Mauser rifle. He pulled the trigger. A click. The rifle had failed. He worked the bolt, ejecting the dud round. He aimed and fired again. Click. A second failure. He repeated the action twice more. Click, click. 4 times the vintage rifle refused to fire. As the bear stood over its second victim, Reed chambered a 5th round, aimed, and squeezed the trigger. This time, the rifle fired. The shot struck the bear, and the animal collapsed, dead. The sudden silence was broken by cries of pain and horror. Horatio Chappell was dead. Reed's head was severely bitten. Scott had deep wounds from the bear's claws, and another explorer, Andrew Rook, had been clawed across the face. The official investigation that followed was a grim accounting of failed protocols. The bear was found to be starving, its teeth in a state of advanced decay. The expedition's modified alarm fence, and most critically, the absence of a dedicated bear watch, were cited as direct contributing factors to the tragedy. The event at Von Postbreen Glacier is a clinical, brutal case study in the cascading failure of safety measures. It serves as a permanent record of how a series of small, well-intentioned compromises can dismantle layers of security, leaving a vulnerable group exposed to the desperate final act of a dying predator.